Okay, we are live.
बाय द वे यहाँ की रिकॉर्डिंग भी स्टार्ट करते हैं.
Manal, I'm sending you the link. Paste it on.
ओके यहाँ की रिकॉर्डिंग भी स्टार्ट कर दें.
Yes, start it.
ओके यहाँ की रिकॉर्डिंग भी स्टार्ट कर दें.
Assalamu alaikum. We will
Walaikum
just
salam.
wait for I think so 5 to 10 minutes more. Let others join and then we'll begin, inshallah. And Manal Khan will be moderating it. So I will join in just after your talk.
Dr. Ariba, am I going first?
Yeah, you're going first. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. And I can leave after that, right? Sure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, sure.
Okay, okay, thanks.
Okay, I think so we should begin now. So I request Manal Khan to moderate the event. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Manal Khan. I'm the content creator in the digital marketing team at Taqwa Invest. Islamic finance is a branch of finance which is governed by Sharia laws. It has recently gained attention post the global financial crisis, and the Islamic financial institutes were not adversely affected as compared to their conventional counterparts. Recently, there has been a rise in Islamic tech industries, especially in the West and Southeast Asia. Companies such as Taqwa Invest, Munzil, Kestrel, Ethis, Alghaz, Rizq, Wahid, Yalla Halal, and many more have risen. In today's session, we will be joined by Dr. Iskandar Shah, Dr. Kinan Salim, and Usman Malik, who will be discussing zakat, the impact of COVID-19 on Islamic finance, and the future of Islamic finance. Our first speaker is Dr. Iskandar Shah. He is a doctor from the University of Nottingham. Currently, he is the Associate Dean of the School of Graduate and Professional Studies at INSEF. He will be speaking about the future of Islamic finance. And now I welcome Dr. Iskandar Shah.
Thank you so much, Manal. Let me share my screen first. Okay. So can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, Dr. Ari Bahan, and also congratulations for founding this company. Again, this is a great opportunity for me to share some of the thoughts that I have about the future of Islamic finance. So I just have few points to make. I was given about 20 minutes to 25 minutes slots. So several points that I want to highlight. But before I go in details, I just want to quote um, some of the things that are being discussed recently at the global stage. For example, in the recent Davos Forum in Singapore, they all are talking about Great Reset Initiative. So they have identified, for example, the 5 domains of Great Reset Initiative. The first one, designing cohesive, sustainable, and resilient economic system. And second one is driving responsible industry transformation and growth, enhancing stewardship of global commons, harnessing the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, and last but not least, advancing global and regional cooperations. Even a quote by the IMF director, Kristalina Georgieva, she apparently saying that other than the massive injection of fiscal stimulus to help countries deal with this crisis, we are required to shift gears for growth to return. The 3 key aspects of growth are green growth, smarter growth, and also fairer growth. So in other words, you look at all the agenda that going on, especially after this COVID-19, apparently they're looking for a new narrative. And that narrative is basically based on the notions of resetting. So what does it imply to us? It simply implies to us is that they are looking for an alternative way of doing things. And this is not something new. Apparently, if you remember in 2008, after the global financial crisis, they were discussing about in an alternative system. But again, this COVID-19 is showing that how fragile the system is. And they are indeed looking towards resetting the global agenda, especially the macro agenda. So how does that imply to Islamic finance? So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that the crisis present a great opportunity for us to basically align the agenda of Islamic finance toward the global agenda. By doing so, we will increase the relevancy of Islamic finance. So the future of Islamic finance, whether Islamic finance we have a greater role to play, depends very much whether we can align the concept of Islamic finance to the global agenda. And based on what I have quoted just now, I don't see any of the agenda seems to be an anathema or against or counterintuitive towards the Islamic finance agenda. So more or less, all these things are actually aligned. More or less, all these things are actually a parallel path that eventually will lead to the same destinations. So I feel especially practicing Islamic finance and working in the institution that propagate and promote the agenda of Islamic finance, I feel this is a great opportunity. Of course, there's just a variety of areas that we have to cover if you want to talk about, holistically what Islamic finance can do. However, I just going to be focusing on few: sustainability. I'm going to talk about inclusion and a bit on talent development. And end of the day, try to basically put things holistically. But before I start about halal economy, I just basically want to say about there are several things that we have to really consider whenever we talk about future of something, especially future of something big, which is like Islamic finance. Because whenever we talk about a nation of nation development, a notion of the nation development, we always try to look at the infrastructure of a nation development. First, we look at the economic system. Second, we look at the financial system, and then we look at the education system, and then political system, health system, and more importantly, we also look at the governance and also the role of institutions. So all these things are actually interrelated, and all these things are deciding how we're going to deal with environmental issue and how we actually going to deal with social issue. So when we look at the problems, then we see that there seems to be quite solutions that are going to come out of these problems. So, so in order for us to really make Islamic finance more relevant, we need to basically embed Islamic finance in all these notions. Whether it's an economic system, whether it's a financial system, whether it's a health system, whether it's a technological infrastructure, whether it's a physical infrastructure, human development and governance and institutional quality. So the concept of Islamic finance has to be there, and the concept of the maqasid has to be there as well. So whether we like it or not, we need to basically create a new path, a path that makes sure that we are not doing damage to the environment, and we make sure that the society are more inclusive, and the prosperity are being shared across you know across, whether it's geographical or racial or whatever. It has to be inclusive, and also it has to be a shared prosperity. So how Islamic finance can become more relevant? So let me just basically highlight one of the most important things that happening. So first of all, we develop Islamic finance. So we have a system which is a debt-based, and then we're trying to implement Islamic finance so that we will probably go more into an equity-based system. Of course, the transition will take time. It's not easy. First, we start from the mimicking stage, and then we become a bit more innovative, and then eventually we're going to become the market leader. For example, in Malaysia, we started with zero. Now we probably control about 25 to 30% of the overall Islamic banking asset in Malaysia. Suku is much more. So slowly, we from mimicking, replicating, toward innovating, and sooner or later will become a market leader. But of course, at the global stage, Islamic finance still very small. It's only about 1% or 2%. That number has to change. So how that number going to change? So unless the conventional system, which is based on speculative investment and excessive, for example, bubble that we are seeing in the stock market or even in the property market, the growth of Islamic finance has to be in tandem with the growth of the Islamic economy. But of course, today, when we define halal, for example, we only look at halal food, which is probably the biggest market share. And then we look at media, we look at cosmetics, we are looking at pharma, and then fashion, so on and so forth. But this has to change as well. For me, the definition of halal, anything not just halal, but also tayyiban. It means that anything that bring positive benefit to the society. Even, for example, if you do something which is related to climate change, fighting climate change, for example, um, for me, that considered as a halal and tayyiban too. Building infrastructure and make people life better. Create a higher quality education. Building universities. So all those things are actually has to be defined as a halal economy as well. So as a start, if you look at the numbers, we are not so bad. Islamic finance is almost about 3 trillion. The rest, the real economy, is almost close to that number as well. It's about 2 trillion. But relatively, if you take into consideration, for example, the fact that Muslim population is about 2 billion people, about 25% of the world population, but our contribution to the economy is only about 6 to 7%. So it makes us wonder, you can look it from it's a great so I want to make, do not want to grow Islamic finance based on financializations of the our financial system, or or liberalization of the financial system, which end up make the end up with excessive speculation, with the derivatives products, so on and so forth. We want the Islamic finance to grow in tandem with the growth of the real economy, because the purpose of having Islamic finance is that we want to set a different concept, or the proof of concept that we are different than the what we are seeing right now. Because this problem of inequality is not only happening, for example, in the emerging economy, it's also happening in the developed economy. If you go to America, for example, you can see that a lot of people doesn't even have health insurance, doesn't have good health coverage. Some of them even have to travel to Canada to buy insulin, because the price of insulin is very expensive in America. And if you are not covered by insurance, then you are not be able to get your basic treatment. So in other words, development that violate basic human rights or universal access to good education and also health system and security may not what Islamic finance propagate, and what is not something that we want to achieve as well. So we want to achieve growth, but our proof of concept has to be slightly different than what we are saying. We want to grow, but we want to grow differently. And halal economy is perhaps one of the key notions that can easily support the growth of Muslim countries. Some countries are doing better than the others, but holistically, I think we have to get together and make the Islamic finance as the center of the engine of growth, so that the financing are much more sustainable, stable, and try to use more resharing products as compared to risk transfer product. But we have to move there gradually, not overnight, because it will take time to evolve, and it all has to supported by a great institutional framework, rule of law, and so on and so forth. And I also believe that, of course, this is not my domain, but I also believe that with the emergence of fintech and also digitalization, we can use that to build our trust system. Because digitalization, for example, and technology can remove many layers of inefficiency. It can build a mechanism of trust which is really lacking in the Muslim world, can improve our governance structure, can reduce corruption, and can make things even better, and also can democratize financial products, and also rule and regulations. So in that way, I think we can see a faster growth in terms of propagating Islamic finance, and the emergence of Indonesia as a superpower of world economy, going to become the fifth largest of economy in the world. And then we are also looking at transformation plan that happening in Saudi Arabia, and also in Turkey, and also Malaysia 2030 shared prosperity vision. So in other words, it seems that we are able to develop blueprint in terms of transforming our economy, but we cannot transform our economy without a proper financial system. And I really hope that Islamic finance will be the so-called the anchor or the epicenter of this transformation that taking place in the Muslim world. So this is just to give you a quick indicator about where we are right now. Of course, Malaysia is probably leading in a certain domain, but we really hope that this number will change soon. We really want to see that more countries are embracing Islamic finance. More countries are actually understanding the principle of Islamic finance. More countries are putting up the infrastructure for Islamic finance in terms of regulation, but also market infrastructure, quality of institution, but more importantly, human capital. Of course, Malaysia have a proof of concept, but we want that proof of concept to be exported, but supported by many other proof of concept as well. So not just our concept, but a concept that happening globally in Qatar and Bahrain and in Indonesia, for example, with their Islamic digital economy. So a lot of new ideas and innovative products are actually coming in. Okay. Are you all seeing my slide? Is my slide moving?
Yes. Yeah.
It's moving, right?
Yes, it's moving. Yeah.
Okay, now it's stuck. Okay. I do not know why, but now suddenly my just give me a second. I'm not able to. Okay. So this is just another indicator that the achievement that we have achieved so far, amazing achievement. Of course, the data might be outdated, but we are looking at, for example, uptrend trajectory in terms of spending. Good sign, population is growing. There are plenty of good news when it comes to the Muslim world. Currently, it's about 1.8 billion. We're going to reach 2 billion very soon. And sooner we're going to basically hit about 2.7 billion in 2050. And the other good thing about the Muslim world is that 25% of the substantial portion of the Muslim community will be in a young group age. So in other words, we can look at a lot of positivity, but that positivity has to be supported in the investment in human capital. But more importantly, I want to highlight here is that we cannot succeed without regional cooperation. I'm always amazed, for example, when you look at China, who able to uplift almost 800 million people, and they increase the purchasing power. And what they are doing right now is that they are putting all the cities together under the concept of one belt, one road. So what it does is that, it improve the infrastructure, it improve the supply chain, it improve the connectivity, and also it remove a lot of barrier to trade as well. So I always wonder why we can't do something which is quite similar to that for connecting all the Muslim world as well. Remove all the unnecessary barriers, improve connectivity, improve supply chain, and make, for example, Dubai or Middle East as the hub, and this part of the world, for example, Malaysia and Jakarta and all these places as a hub, so that the connectivity can become even faster. And using digital technology, remove all these barriers, for example. Just to give you a simple example, if you go to Singapore, you can get clearance from the port within a day. But in Malaysia, for example, it take about 3 to 4 days. If from the business point of view, 3 to 4 days is basically costing them a lot of money. If you hire a fuel tanker, one day rental is probably like thousands of US dollars. So one day mean a lot of cost from business perspective. So what we need to try to do is that, create an holistic regional development, put digitalization in place, supported by fintech, and also using Islamic finance for trade products and so on and so forth, so that this number that we are seeing here, top Islamic finance, top halal food, media recreation, and all these things, these costs are just going to get better and better. Because they always say that, there's a glory days, right? Or we have seen the glory days of America, but now we are seeing the glory days of China, for example, and then we've seen the glory days of Japan 20-30 years ago. So I really hope that we can also live to see the glory days of the Muslim trades. Not just trade, but more majority of the product are internally produced. The technology and the science and the advancement are generated within ourselves, so that when we can create more innovative products, more solution, then it's easier to grow, to build Islamic finance. Because without real economy, we cannot we cannot build Islamic finance. If we can do that by doing just an excessive speculation investments. So that's not what we want, because we want to have a different proof of concept. But definitely, hopefully, when I present this thing 10 years from now or 5 years from now, all these numbers have to change. In fact, it has to get better and better. Okay, just quickly to tell you that, a lot of positive that you are seeing, a lot of uptrend that you are seeing. The numbers are just fantastic. So we don't have to worry so much about the numbers in the near future. But more importantly, we have to worry about the relative number. So when I talk about the relative number, what exactly we have to highlight here is that, the size of Islamic finance from the global perspective remains below 2% for many, many years. Even though the industry is growing and in double digit, however, the size of Islamic finance still remain at 2%. So that means more aggressive approach have to be taken in terms of promoting Islamic banking, but more importantly, Islamic capital market. But one area which is really underdeveloped is what we call takaful and also wealth management. Yes, a lot of discussion that happening about social finance, but social finance, remember, is a form of redistribution or a small scale development. So it may not contribute that much, but it's very important to promote inclusion and also stability and making sure the welfare, especially the vulnerable and fragile society, are taken care as well. So there are four domains of Islamic finance that we have to advance. And this can only happen if we keep on pushing for better infrastructure and ecosystem. And fintech is a very important part of it. So that's why, these people who are pushing for fintech and digitalization and simplicity and and greater transparency are more than welcome, because this is all an ecosystem which is required to build Islamic finance in the future. So why I'm putting this slide is that one way for Islamic finance to grow is that for us to rally on the development at the global stage. Today, because of this COVID, and also even prior to that, people are talking about green growth. People are talking about smarter growth and everything. So this idea of Islamic finance is very much aligned to the green agenda, a fairer agenda, a smarter agenda. So so sometimes we just do not have to brand it as Islamic finance. We can even wrap it under the emblem of sustainability and also inclusivity, and that can also push the agenda of Islamic finance, especially in the non-Muslim countries. Because what really matters is that it's a proof of concept. And a lot of people are taking advantage of this proof of concept. Green agenda is considered probably one of successful agenda because the threat of climate change is real. People die because of climate change. In fact, COVID happened because of this destruction of biodiversity, because it makes us closer to animal, and animal carry a lot of virus, and the mutation of the virus makes a threat of another pandemic is also what you call it, imminent. So it's very important for us to understand that don't discount green agenda, don't discount inclusive agenda, because these are biggest threat that we are facing in the world, especially inequality. And now we are talking about K economy, people, a portion of the society going upward and the portion of the society going downward. So we do not want a K economy, we want an inclusive economy. So, and we need new ideas, and of course what I'm talking about is just a framework, a basic discussion, but we need to go detail and prepare the nitty gritty. So I hope the younger generation who are listening to me can actually try to come up with innovative solution, how we can rally, for example, from the green bond initiative. So how we can actually make our train more the ecological, our transformation system, for example, more green, and a lot of amazing technology that happening nowadays. Train can move at 400, 500 kilometer per hour using magnetic approach. uh, you know Renewable energy technology, how we recycle the plastics, how we create energy from sanitation, how we can create clean water, how we can actually ensure food security, and a lot of new technology are coming, 5G, quantum computing, and space technology, and all of them actually are related. So we are not just talking about driving Islamic finance to create a better ecosystem, but we hope that the other component of the ecosystem, which is science and education and also health and also governance, grow in parallel with Islamic finance. Because the beauty about financial system is that you will have a higher governance structure. you know in the banking system, compliance is basically one of the most important things. Sharia review is basically one of the most important thing. So if you can have that kind of ecosystem in other concept as well, especially in government, in governance of school and hospitals and everything, so can you imagine how we can build a trust in the all the important part of the ecosystem, and we can eliminate or minimize corruption and abuse of power, then we can see that nation can be transformed very quickly. I always make a joke about, people used to make joke about Indonesia, that, corruption was so obvious or so vivid, you can even see it on the road. But today, for example, because of good leadership that has happened in Indonesia for the last 10, 20 years, you can see there's a transformation that taking place in that nation. And they will be easily become the fifth largest economy in the world in a few years' time. And that is very beneficial for the Muslim world because, Malaysia, for example, will benefit a lot because rich Indonesia will travel a lot to Malaysia and buy Malaysian product. And it will create a better ecosystem between Malaysia and also Indonesia. So it's always better to have a rich neighbor as compared to a poor neighbor. I'm not saying that poor neighbor is a liability, but having a rich neighbor means that we can actually grow together. But as I said, what we need right now is actually a proof of concept. The last point or the third point which I'm trying to make here is that I have another 5 minutes, so let me wrap up my presentation. So we have to basically make sure that, like what I said just now, we cannot go back to the K economy. All right, finance has to be inclusive. It has to be a mechanism to fight economic injustice. Because today, one of the elephant in the room is that people are not really talking about is tax evasion. It's a very sensitive issue. So a lot of tax evasion is happening. People are just moving money from one country to another country, creating so many LLC, putting the money in speculative bubble investment or asset investment. And what does it do? It makes that the government have lack funding to finance healthcare and education. So when you are not able to finance healthcare and education, the poor especially will not be have an opportunity to experience social mobility. Without good education, for example, I will not be here and talking to you guys and enjoy a social mobility. So what we hope is that opportunity are given to everyone, and sometimes it's just the role of the government to provide that opportunity. But if the system allow tax evasion, if the system, for example, finance allow creative solution that you can reduce tax by moving one money to another tax haven, so on and so forth, then some countries will not be able to provide opportunity to everyone. So Islamic finance has to be different. It has to be inclusive, and then it has to basically fight our biggest problem in the Muslim world, which is basically poverty. And we still can, this is real. Food security is real. Poverty is real. I was watching a movie that day, about a refugee, and apparently millions of people have died because they have to move from one country to another country, seeking economic liberation, seeking economic opportunity, seeking freedom, so on and so forth. So if we are not able to use our knowledge and our system to support this kind of people, don't get me wrong, I'm not a socialist, but what I'm trying to say is that if we are not able to create a proof of concept that we can actually fight poverty, like what we have seen in China, using Islamic finance, then whatever knowledge that we have may be quite meaningless lah. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. So all the other things we are just keep on a highlight, that we need to do things differently, and for that, for Islamic finance, the most important thing is talent. A lot of talents are actually required. So I really hope that the young people who are listening to me, try to embrace Islamic finance, not because it's Islamic only, or just because it's Islamic, but bear in mind, in order for us to move, we need a better ism. Last time we have socialism, and then now we had communism, we have fascism, now we have capitalism. So we need a better ism. Okay, so the better ism will give us a guiding principles so that we can fight racism, we can fight sexism, we can fight, whatever issues that may come across, because we have something to hold on to, and that is our guiding principles. And you don't have to sacrifice your profit in order for you to do that, because if you make it more inclusive, then whatever you build going to be more sustainable. But when you create a fragile society or fragile financial system, whatever you build will be destroyed in 10 years, and then you have to rebuild again. And that's not the legacy that you want to create. You want to create something which is more sustainable, less fragile, more predictable, minimize uncertainty, and more importantly, create greater and greater opportunity. So this is basically my last slide. So because I'm from an academic institution, I'm from INSEF. So I really feel that we really have to revisit our education system. um, we really have to basically look at the input of Islamic finance, not only at university level, but even at the school level, or even at the advanced learners level, so that it become our way of life. We do our governance structure, we do our banking system along the principle of Islamic finance, not just because it's Islamic, because it's a better way of doing things. And we need that proof of concept. We need that evidence that this is actually better. But just being 2% is very hard to create that proof of concept. People will not listen to you if you are small. You have to make yourself bigger. But it will take time, but eventually you will get there. So with that, thank you so much to Dr. Ariba and also to the organizer. I'm not sure whether I have time to answer your questions, but I leave it to the host. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iskander, for giving us a highlight about the future of Islamic finance. You were right about the green bonds and sustainable products available. One of the major goals of Taqwa Invest mission is to facilitate investment in sustainable products. If anyone has any questions, please write them in the chat area. Thank you.
Any questions, Manal? I can't see the.
Yeah, I don't think there are any questions, so let's move on with Dr. Kinan Salim.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Huh? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right.
Our next speaker is Dr. Kinan Salim. He is an assistant professor and head of Islamic digital economy at INSEF. He specializes in Islamic fintech, data analytics, and sustainable finance, amongst other research areas. He brings over 15 years of experience in Islamic finance. He led Islamic fintech and Islamic finance projects in Southeast Asia and Middle East. Early in his career, he served as the head of corporate finance in Sham Islamic Bank. With a strong economics background and industry experience, Dr. Kinan converges theory with best practices in his teaching, research, and consultancy that are focusing mostly on designing frameworks and providing capacity buildings for innovative policies and products for Islamic fintech and sustainable finance. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Kinan Salim to speak about the impact of COVID-19 on Islamic finance.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you very much for your kind invitation for this forum, and I also want to congratulate you for the new startup that you are starting, which is really encouraging. I feel really very happy when I see the spirit of entrepreneurship is increasing among scholars, where digitalization, of course, it facilitates that fund. A lot of startup consultancy, which is amazing. I want to thank Dr. Iskander for the beautiful presentation for the future of Islamic finance and banking and the opportunities ahead. He really points beautifully how sustainable one of the main target or one of the main goals that Islamic finance can achieve within the next few years, and then also as he mentioned fintech as a tool to achieve that one, or to achieve the innovation in Islamic finance. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about fintech, Islamic fintech, and how COVID-19 affect Islamic fintech. Now, of course, when we talk about Islamic fintech, there is something very important we need always to keep in mind, which is an advantage for Islamic fintech. When you compare Islamic banking to conventional banking, you compare an industry which has like 300, 400 years old, conventional banking, when it's only 30 or 40 years old, the Islamic banking, right? So there is a very big difference in that cumulative accumulating experience over the time. And maybe this is one of the reasons why Islamic banking still mimicking, still following the style of the conventional banking. Now, you look at the fintech is totally different ballgame. Conventional fintech started a few years back, right? And this is coming, of course, with the IR4, Industrial Revolution 4, and other aspects of the spreading of the internet and all this. So it just started. And at the same time, almost Islamic fintech started. Maybe the difference only a few years. So this is a really an advantage for Islamic fintech. It's an advantage to be innovative. It's an advantage not for sure, not to mimic the conventional fintech. It's actually to come up with a new product, with a new structures, with innovative structures that really can reflect the essence of Sharia, the maqasid of Sharia in the products and services. So this is one of the advantages that Islamic fintech actually can start with. The other thing that really interesting in fintech, but by definition, is innovative, is disruptive. Now you just think about cryptocurrency, think about Bitcoin. How come this something there's off the air, nothing there, and now most of the people they believe in it, they invest in it, the market size of it, the capitalization, everything is moving, talking about Bitcoin and all these things. And you think, what is Bitcoin? The concept is very, uh, it's nothing, right? I mean, nothing like robust in the concept itself, meaning that the ideas is very important right now, and Islamic fintech can really come up with an innovative ideas, with disruptive ideas. I believe that Bitcoin is it's not just disrupting the financial system, it's also disrupting the way that people thinking about innovation. So I believe this is really an like amazing opportunity for Islamic fintech, for Islamic finance to grow and become innovative and come up with the new ideas when you use technique and with new products. Now, moving toward what I want to talk about, which is the impacts of COVID-19 on Islamic fintech. Actually, you see, COVID-19 was like it was really disruptive, and while it, of course, it has a really bad impact on the health globally, on the wealth as well. So it's like this health and wealth trade-off all the time. So it have this impact. However, for fintech, the impact was a little bit different from that perspective. In one of the recent studies that come up from it's called the Global COVID-19 FinTech Market Rapid Assessment Study. Actually, the study done by the Cambridge Center of Alternative Finance with the University of Cambridge and the World Bank and World Economic Forum. So what they try to do in this study, they try to see what was the impact of COVID on the fintech company itself. Of course, there are many other studies try to see what is the impact of COVID on the people, on the SMEs. And if you look at the SMEs specifically, the impact was very strong. We talk about disruptive in the supply chain. We talk about disruptive in the access to finance. There's the closure, the market access, the demand, all these factors affecting the SMEs. So they try to see what's happened to fintech companies, because a lot of fintech companies also they are small, right? So how it has been affected by the COVID. Interestingly, most of them they did well during the COVID-19. Only few verticals they affected negatively, but most of the verticals of fintech they've been doing well, and that's amazing. That's especially for the Islamic fintech. So it's an opportunity to go forward with that one. Of course, one of the main reasons why they did well, fintech in general, one of the main reasons is because of the digitalization, the disrupt the amount or the power of the disruptive that happened in this year for the amazing. As one of the digital officers in the company's mentioned, he says, we have those plans for innovation or for digitalization that we have this in place. But what COVID did, this plan is just applied in few months. So it's just foster the development of the innovation and the digitalization. And that was really in the interest of fintech company. For example, a payment. All the people do the buying online, the e-commerce, right? We all of us now do using the e-commerce platform to buy the things online. So when you use the e-commerce, of course, we will use the digital channel for payment, the e-payment. And this is where a lot of payment will flourish within the COVID-19. So for them, that was really a very good story. That was a successful story for them, for the digital payment companies. Interestingly, for the companies, for the startup or the fintech startup that they are working in like for example, we talk about digital asset exchange, we talk about digital custody, and those we talk about the auto robots. So those kind of company also in the COVID-19. Not difficult for that one, but one of the reasons which was very interesting that when COVID-19 hit the economy, and start to give the moratorium to the people, right? So many of the people, their salary is still going on. But they have the moratorium, have an extra cash. So now what they do with the extra cash? So many of them have cash. I want to invest. I want to invest. Oh, there's a new application to invest. Let's try this one. So many people, retail investors, start to use those applications within the COVID-19 time. Other interesting reality, the family now sitting together. So the father with the sons and the daughters, they are sitting together. And while the old generations, those who are in the 50s or 60s, they are all tech savvy, right? But then their kids, the Z generation, they are tech savvy. So he asked him, okay, this app for investment, how does it work? Then the kids come, or the son come to his father and show him how it works. And then he starts to invest. So together, the family sitting together, they start the technology in invest, in payment, in saving. Right? So this push for those company like the Robo Advisory, so actually they did well during the COVID-19. In addition, to franchise that they already have, because when you talk about Robo Advisory, the main value proposition for them that they are more cost efficient, right? They give better services and those kind of things. So while those kind of things has been there before the COVID-19, what COVID-19 did actually, it just linked the people for those applications, linked the people. So it was really an amazing opportunities for fintech and for Islamic fintech company. Same thing go for insurtech, same thing go for regtech, for digital banking, because when the government see that, okay, now we are moving toward more digitalization, so they start to say license for digital banking. And that you can see this trend right now, right? In most of the countries. Malaysia want to give license, Singapore, Saudi, UAE, they all coming with a blue to the banking, right? This is a push factor for the start banking license, or they provide services for digital banking. So you see, most of the have been they have been flourishing through the COVID-19. However, one of the sectors in the fintech which hits badly through the COVID-19 was the lending sector. When we talk about P2P, for example, and that's obviously because the current customers they have, the current customer base, default rates start to increase, right? Because most of them, when you talk about P2P, almost of the customers, or all of the customers, they are those MSMEs. And because of what happened to MSMEs, or all the bad luck that happened to them through the COVID-19, so they stopped to pay back. They cannot pay back. So that affect the default rate and affect directly those P2P companies. On other side, because of the COVID, now the risk of the MSMEs grow up, right? So they have higher risk right now. So also those P2P now they are afraid to SMEs because now those same companies they have higher risk. So now less their portfolio become less and less because they don't want to give a new financing in this time where the risk is very high. So P2P companies and of course some of the equity crowdfunding company as well, they have been affected negatively through the COVID-19 because actually that's go for both for conventional and for Islamic fintech. And initially, in the beginning of the COVID-19, when we talk about March, I would say March to May or March to June 2020, a lot of companies staff of fintech and Islamic fintech company they started to do those factors. And if you look at the Islamic fintech right now, comparing Islamic to conventional fintech. So in conventional fintech, we have different verticals, right? You have like 12, I would say 12 to 13 verticals, from lending to equity crowdfunding to regtech, insurtech, wealthtech, and all those kind of things. But when you talk about Islamic fintech, we still have the same verticals almost, but most of the Islamic fintech, they are focusing on the P2P and equity crowdfunding. We have others as well, but most of them, this is their focus. And there's a reason for that because this is a main to conventional. So you can say yes, P2P is totally different from conventional P2P. That's based on debt, that interest financing, which is based on tawarruk or other kind of sale debt financing, Sharia compliant debt financing. So there's a clear distinguishing between two things. But when you talk about other, for example, when you talk about other types of fintech, we talk about eKYC, right? So what is the difference between eKYC? So in many of these articles, the difference is not very clear. That's why you can see few Islamic fintech in that. While most of the Islamic fintech company, they are in the crowdfunding and the P2P. So, and because of that, I would say Islamic because the concentration of Islamic fintech company more on that. Conventional fintech company also try to adapt to the change fintech, so they try to provide or to capitalize on the programs that are coming from the government, for example. So many government they start to give those kind of for kind of, for example. So fintech company, and especially when you talk about the company, and they try to be in that, they try to benefit from that one. So, and actually it happens a lot. Now, for example, if you talk about match funding, so fintech company just need to raise 50% of the cost of the project because the government will come and give the other 50%. The government will come with 75% on top. Help them, and I would say that led some COVID-19. Another aspect, another verticals of Islamic fintech, actually those which they are based on donations, so donation crowdfunding. Because of the COVID, what's happened? A lot of social finance transactions happening. People in need and people help wants to help, not to help. So there were this huge amount of social finance transactions, and this is where those platform, the donation platform, donation Islamic fintech platform, they have platform or conventional social finance platform, they have been from that one. So if I can summarize the impact of COVID on fintech are positive in general. Few very Islamic have been badly affected, but even those few that have been badly affected, they also try to those programs by the government. So they also try now to come out of COVID-19 with more stronger and robust structures and solutions. Now, what is the future ahead for Islamic fintech? Of course, there are a lot of opportunities there, and actually, when things happening like COVID-19, the global financial crisis, when those disruptive events happening, this is the time when you can do something, when you can achieve something. And if you remember, just after the global financial crisis, what happened? Double digit for many years since 2009, 17. So there was a growth in Islamic have been promoted as an alternative to the corrupt finance or conventional system that lead to global crisis. So at that time, Islamic finance have been, I would say, marketed in that way, that this is the alternative, this is the correct alternative, and this is the future. And you see the growth of all assets of different kind of Islamic finance. But what happened after 2016, 17? Just growth is still there, but low. Why low? Because we didn't actually utilize that momentum. There was a momentum and support for Islamic finance, but we didn't build in that one by coming with a new product, innovative product, distinctive product and solutions for Islamic finance. So now we have another opportunity. Now COVID-19 come, disruptive is come, right? So Islamic fintech has the ability to come up with something new. Has the ability to come up with the new features, with the new innovation products and solutions. And there is the demand for that is there because with this adoption of digitalization, so the demand is there. What we need a kind of, I would say, ecosystem for nurturing those Islamic fintech company. And when we talk about ecosystem, we talk about support from the government, from the regulatory. We need regulatory frameworks for Islamic fintech. We need the institution support by giving the innovation lab, the accelerator lab for Islamic fintech. We need the funds for even Islamic fintechs. And most importantly, what we need the human capital in Islamic fintech. And when you talk about the human capital in Islamic fintech, that's really a very important aspect on that one, because in Islamic fintech, there are different aspects for the human capital there. You need to have this finance aspect, finance background aspect. You need to have the Sharia aspect of that. You need to have the tech aspect as well, because we talk about tech there, right? And most importantly, we need to have the entrepreneurial aspect, the entrepreneurial mindset in our human capital. And this is where I see this is the role of universities actually. Universities have been for the last, I would say, 10 or 20 years, when we talk about those universities who are focusing on the finance. In the last 10 or 20 years, they have been focusing on producing talent for corporate world, best employees. This is their main product, talent for corporate world, for banks, for takaful, for insurance company, right? Now, when you talk about fintech, this is not the right recipe for the Islamic fintech. You need to produce people with an entrepreneurial mindset, and this is many differences when you compare to the conventional products or conventional talents that the educational institutions producing right now. So we need this kind of shift, okay? Shift in the mindset for the human capital. We need the whole ecosystem to be together. Alhamdulillah, I would say that there are now this healthy competition. So Malaysia want to be hub for Islamic fintech. UK want to be hub for Islamic fintech. UAE want to be a hub for Islamic fintech. For me, that's really very healthy competition because, as just Dr. Iskander said, if your neighbor is rich, does that mean they will come and buy product and service from you, right? Have many Islamic countries, many countries that are producing Islamic fintech startup, producing unicorns in Islamic fintech. So that will be beneficial, not just for those companies, but it will be beneficial for all the Islamic fintech and the Islamic finance globally. So with that, I want to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Please, if you have any questions, I really would be happy to answer that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kenan, for discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the Islamic finance and the future growth after this current pandemic. If anyone has any questions, please ask them in the chat area below.
Okay, so our first question is why Iran is not amongst the top Islamic finance. Mohammed Kamil is asking, he can see that Iran's GDP is less than half of Pakistan's, which is on the 9th rank. Is GDP a direct representation of Islamic finance in a particular Islamic Republic country?
Okay, so for this question for me or?
Yes, it's for you.
So I was talking about Islamic fintech, but your question is more on Islamic finance. But when you say why Iran is not on the map of finance, do you mention like a specific report or statistics for that, or you talk in general? Yeah, so again, when you mentioned that, you were talking about specific report or statistics, or you're talking in general?
Yes, this question is by a participant. So he's asking about about the particular Islamic.
Okay, so I'll take over. Mohammed Kamil Vakil is asking, I can see Iran's GDP is less than half of Pakistan, which is on the 9th rank. I think so he's asking about a general, that why Iran is not there in the Islamic financial space as compared to Pakistan. Because obviously,
Okay. Okay. There already, they are already in the Islamic finance space in general. It's mentioned, I'd say, in most of the reports. Like, for example, Refinitiv and ICD report. You can check the Islamic digital economy. So see, Iran is already there in the ranking. Sometimes in rank 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 7, depend on which aspect of Islamic finance you talk about. You talk about the banking, the takaful, the capital market. They are there in the report. Iran is one of, I would say, one of the that when the statistics from Iran come in, it come in to say that all the banks are Islamic banks. So that's why you can see the total asset of Islamic banks, it's really exceed most of other countries.
yeah, okay, thank you so much. The next question is how these Islamic fintech platforms are regulated in Sharia perspective. Any particular standard for that?
Okay, good. The Sharia governance for those platforms. Way is to come up with a standalone overall Sharia governance framework for Islamic fintech or for those companies. The other way, you consider these fintech companies and you just require that, okay, we just need to have, for example, a Sharia body or Sharia advisory, Sharia consultant for that specific companies. Now, if you compare those Islamic fintech startup to the Islamic banks or Takaful company, Islamic banks and Takaful company are big and they have the budget, so they can have, for example, Sharia council, Sharia advisors, and all those things. When you talk about Islamic fintech, specifically when it's a small company, just start with the 3, 4, 5 staff there, right? So for them to has the to be able to get to pay the cost for Sharia advisory, it's really costly for them. So what they do kind of consultancy. They will hire a consultant or Sharia consultancy company where they just come and it's kind of outsourcing the Sharia consultancy for that one. But I would say this is in some countries. In many countries, there is no Sharia governance framework yet for the Islamic fintech. But in some countries, they start to come up with this, not as an overall Sharia governance framework, but when they give the license for fintech company, so let's say, okay, if you are doing, for example, if they give the license for P2P, peer-to-peer lending company, peer-to-peer financing company. So they would say, if you want to have kind of Sharia compliant financing, then you need to have a Sharia advisor in that sense, right? But in the same time, I know a lot of equity company, for example, where they don't have the status of compliant, or they don't say that they don't like claim that we are compliant, but at the same time, you see their checklist. They would say we are not going to finance alcohol and all the other aspects that Islamic banks will not finance. Okay, and at the same time, they use equity crowdfunding, which is in principle Sharia compliant. So what I would say here, the lines or how to differentiate Islamic fintech startup from the conventional fintech startup is still blur there. Still not, there's no clear cut in that one. And from regulatory perspective, till now, most of the regulatory perspective, they are not having that clear rule that this is Islamic and this is not Islamic when it comes to Islamic fintech startup. That's understood because Islamic fintech is still, and the fintech all still new, and Islamic fintech still new. But I believe through the years, so maybe in the following 2 or 3 years, will be more organized and more the governance structure and the governance framework for Islamic fintech will be more robust.
Okay, so the next question is, legal structure recognized worldwide in Islamic finance or banking?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Do we have a legal structure recognized worldwide in Islamic finance or banking?
Legal. Okay, so most of the countries, they have their own regulations for finance. Like in Sharia, they have sorry, in Malaysia, they have their own regulation for Sharia governance for Islamic banking. In Saudi, they have their own. In UAE, they have their own. And some of them, of course, there are different aspects of those legal frameworks. Because for some of them, what they do, they would say, we have one framework for conventional, and we have totally separate framework for Islamic banking. Like for example, we have the we have the Finance or Financial Act, and we have the Islamic Finance Act. So it's totally different or separated legal perspective. In some other countries, no, they have one act. So it's one financial act, one financial regulations, and then they will have some specific component to talk about Islamic fintech. So it can be different perspective. Now, time there have been this kind of discussions. Let's have one universal framework for Islamic banking, right? And this is where some of the institutions will kind For example, what Ayufi did, Ayufi tried to come up with Sharia standard and accounting standard for financial institutions. And there are a lot of countries, they follow the Ayufi standard. And then you have IFSB, which tried to come up with a capital adequacy and other adequacy standards, for example. So many countries also follow IFSB. So there are those organizations that try to come up with regulations or standards, try to unify or try to close the gap between different countries.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is, can Sharia-based fintech survive and outperform the conventional fintech?
Can survive? Of course. Of course it can survive. Now, can outperform? Okay, that depends. If copying the conventional, so maybe it's not easy to perform. But if they come up with the new structures, with the new innovation, for sure they can outperform. This is one thing. The other thing, when we talk about competition, actually, Sharia compliant and non-Sharia compliant. So one of the way that non-Sharia compliant, I would say similar to conventional banks. So one of the ways that conventional banks compete with Islamic banks is by having Islamic window, right? By having Islamic subsidiary. So there's always that aspect that the conventional or the non-Sharia compliant entity, they can come up with an Islamic arm and compete with the Islamic entity from that perspective, from the Sharia compliant products. However, the Islamic entity, they cannot come up with a conventional arm, okay, to compete with the conventional counterpart, to compete with the conventional companies. So there is always this kind of N level, right, where there is this advantages for the non-Sharia compliant entities. That's why in many of the jurisdictions, they don't allow this. They say, okay, you are either Islamic Sharia compliant or you are conventional. So conventional are not allowed to have windows or subsidiaries, right? So you are either conventional or you are Islamic. So trying to level the playing field between Islamic and conventional. But on the long run, for Islamic fintech, yes, it can outperform conventional fintech if they come up with a new or with innovative products and services, number one. Number two, it also depends on the country where they are functioning. Like, for example, if you are functioning in a country with a majority of Muslim population there, and where those majority of Muslims, they want to have Sharia compliant solutions, so of course you can outperform the conventional, because the conventional, if they are not avoid it, right, and go to the Sharia. Depend on the jurisdictions that you are trying to get.
Thank you so much. The next question is that what are your views about Islamic fintech for microfinance?
We have a P2P platform, P2P Sharia compliant platform, and we have equity crowdfunding Sharia compliant platform. So both of them, these are Islamic fintech, and both of them, their services is going for microfinance. So they are there already, and I believe, it's my own view, I believe that for Islamic fintech right now, this is the focus area. This is the focus area, and this is where they can really get the point in that one. Because as I mentioned, like for example, if you talk about eKYC, what is the distinctive Islamic aspect there? So not clear, right? But when you talk about financing, so it's very clear that because riba is prohibited, then you need to come up with another solution. So it's very distinctive that you have the Sharia compliant microfinance through crowdfunding or through the P2P Sharia compliant P2P platforms.
Perfect.
But of
Thank
course,
you so much.
of course, you need to keep. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
Of course,
Yeah,
you
you
need to
can
keep
go
in
ahead.
mind. Yeah, yeah. You need to keep in mind that we need to be careful because when you talk about microfinancing, MSMEs, we need to be careful because the risk is much higher, right? That's normal. The risk is higher. So here it's a key factor for Islamic fintech to play at that field is to come up with a solution that not just depending on the traditional credit assessment framework. You need to come up with a new, with alternative credit assessment. And there are some solutions they start to grow, like using, for example, using machine learning and artificial intelligence for the transaction data, using the psychometric data, using the social platform data as well. So it's very essential that you be able to combine those kind of new data to come up with a better assessment for the customers. And when you come up with a better assessment, so what you are really doing, you are reducing, minimizing the risk of that one. And then hopefully it can be more successful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I would request Manal to now take over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kinan. Now you all must be wondering what is Taqwa Invest, and for that I welcome our founder, Dr. Ariba Khan, to tell us more about Taqwa Invest and its mission. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Ariba Khan, founder and CEO of Taqwa Invest. Taqwa Invest is an Islamic robo-advisory, which is based in DIFC. We have recently obtained the innovation license. Taqwa Invest is built on the idea and belief to facilitate investment in halal products and spread awareness about Islamic finance among the different communities. Taqwa has a team of 5 dedicated and highly qualified professionals. We also have 3 dedicated interns who have the same vision as ours. We have goal-based, growth-based, and socially responsible investment options for our users. Initially, we will be available for our users in UAE, and inshallah, by 2022, our application will be made available to our users in South Asia. I would like to request you all to follow our social media pages and drop in your email ID so that we can include you in the waiting list. Thank you so much.
Now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, an award-winning lecturer, Usman Malik. Team Taqwa is very thankful to Usman Malik for advising us and guiding us at different stages. Today, he will be focusing on one of the core principles of Islamic finance and one of the pillars of Islam, zakat. Now I welcome Dr. Usman Malik.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam wa tasliman kathira amma ba'd. Forever and always we begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for indeed his name is worthy of beginning with, and for indeed all praise and thanks belongs to him and him alone, and indeed he alone is worthy of worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated within his deen a pillar, the pillar of zakat. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Bunyul Islamu ala khams, that Islam is built upon five pillars. And he said that they are ash-shahada, as-salah, zakat, som, and hajj. And interestingly, if you look at this hadith, some of the commentators of hadith, they explain that zakat is the central pillar, meaning that when the Prophet ﷺ narrated these pillars, zakat was in the center. And if you look at a building that is established or upheld by pillars, the central pillar plays a very interesting role within that, right? From an architectural perspective. So if you were to apply that concept to zakat as a central pillar of Islam, then what is the specific role that zakat is playing? That's something that each and every one of us must reflect upon, as zakat is a pillar in our deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he legislated zakat, there were certain concepts that he subhanahu wa ta'ala told us through this, right? One of those concepts is essentially zakat is a fund for the development of Islam, right? It's not just charity, it's not just to take care of the poor and needy. Zakat starts at that particular concept of taking care of the poor and needy, but then it goes beyond that, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah At-Tawbah mentions 8 categories of zakat, right? He mentions 8 categories of zakat. Now, those 8 categories, they start with the poor and needy, right? They start with the poor and needy. Interestingly, they don't end there. And we have examples in the history of Islam when poverty had been completely eradicated or alleviated, right? In the time of, for example, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and some of the other pious Muslim leaders, where they were trying to distribute zakat and they could not find anybody who was in need of it, right? They could not find anybody who was in need of it. So I wanted to mention this as a starting point, that ultimately zakat is a pillar of Islam that is the fund for the development of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Is the fund for the development of the deen and submission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have examples that essentially explain to us that if you look at zakat historically and classically, zakat is a concept that is collected and distributed from the Baytul Mal, the house of wealth, right? The treasury of the Muslims. And when you reflect upon how zakat was collected and distributed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, you begin to understand a principle and a philosophy of zakat itself. That each and every one of us, when we reach a certain level of wealth, the level of nisab, we must now calculate our wealth and pay 2.5% that is mandatory upon it, right? In terms of our net assets. Obviously, the zakat rates differ when it comes to livestock and agriculture and so on and so forth, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to keep it simple in terms of what it concerns majority of us, and that's 2.5%, right? So the calculation of zakat, this is something that I wanted to raise awareness of, and I have been doing this for many years now. Essentially, what I've noticed what takes place in terms of zakat is oftentimes people, they pay the zakat as an estimate. The 2.5%, they estimate it. They don't necessarily calculate the zakat as it deserves to be calculated, right? The calculation stage of zakat is a part and parcel of zakat. It's part of the worship. So, for example, when you pray salah, the tahara element, right, the wudu, the ghusl, or tayammum, is mandatory. It's a prerequisite of the salah. So just like that, for zakat, its calculation is a prerequisite, meaning you must calculate your zakat. You must know how much assets you have, how much liabilities you have, and as a result, your net assets, upon that, you pay 2.5%, right? Your assets are inclusive of various different asset classes, gold and silver, how much money you have, your savings, right? Your cash at hand, your bank balance, right? Even the change that you may have in your car or in your home or anywhere else, for that matter. Every single penny has to be, inshallah ta'ala, accounted for, right? And this is very important in terms of the calculation of zakat. Now, you also include within that your investments, your share values as per the date you're calculating the zakat. You also include within that any money that is owed to you, and you go through it systematically. Your business assets are also included within that. And then you take away from that any liabilities that you may have, right? The personal liabilities and business liabilities and so forth. But this is just to point out, this is short-term liabilities. This is not necessarily concerning long-term liabilities, your like for example your mortgages or anything like that, right? It's focusing on the short-term debts that you may have, the money that you owe to people, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I wanted to raise awareness of, because ultimately we can't cover the fiqh of zakat. Essentially, we can't cover the calculations of zakat within this particular seminar. But I wanted to raise awareness of this and basically let all of you brothers and sisters know that if you need any help in terms of your calculation of zakat, then do reach out to me, inshallah ta'ala. The Taqwa Invest team will share my details. This is something that I help people with in terms of calculating their zakat and so forth. Purely because Ramadan is only 5 weeks away now, and majority of zakat, from my personal experience, gets paid in Ramadan. And in the build up to Ramadan, people are trying to calculate the zakat. They're trying to assess how much they have, and if they owe anyone any money, and they're trying to figure it all out. And then they have their specific date in Ramadan in which they pay the zakat. And on this point, just before I continue, I wanted to add a little tangent here, and that is that the scholars of Islam, they actually mention that even if you have a zakat anniversary date, right? If it's in Ramadan or the Hijjah, whenever it is, then in times of need, in times of, you can say, great sort of requirement for it, you can pay the zakat earlier. So if the situation presents itself within the economy, or there is a crisis, or whatever have you, then it is acceptable to pay zakat prior to your zakat date, inshallah ta'ala. So something that I wanted to point out, that inshallah ta'ala, whilst we are majority of us, and I'd say with the bulk of the ummah, over 90% from my research and my findings, over 90% of the people pay zakat in Ramadan. So a message to my brothers and sisters, in times, in light of COVID-19, the pandemic, the global lockdowns, it has resulted in millions of people being pushed into extreme poverty across the world. So my advice and my call to action at this point in time is that if you can, inshallah ta'ala, pay your zakat prior to your zakat date in this particular year, then bi'idhnillah ta'ala, do that, inshallah ta'ala, because the need of the hour is zakat. Zakat is something that is heavily needed by those who are on the receiving end, the beneficiaries. So this is something that I wanted to point out. But ultimately, it is up to you in terms of how and when you calculate your zakat. And if you need any help and assistance with regards to that, inshallah ta'ala, we can help you in that. But ultimately, I wanted to suggest that zakat connects the payer of zakat to the Muslim ummah in general. We have a very interesting story from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. During his time, there was a famine and there was no rainfall for days and weeks, and the Muslim ummah was starving in Medina. And one day, there's a narration that a bunch of clouds came over Medina. The shade had covered the whole of Medina, and the companions who were with the Prophet, with Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, sorry, they were expecting rainfall. However, the clouds, as they came, they left without any rainfall, without a drop of rain. And the companions, they became demoralized. They became upset at what just took place. They were expecting the rain to come, and it didn't. So now, obviously, the agriculture is going to be affected. The food is going to be affected. The rivers and so forth are going to be affected. So they became upset at that. And Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, at that time, he said, do not worry, let these clouds go wherever they may. Let these clouds go wherever they may, for wherever they go and stop, the rain will fall, and inshallah ta'ala will fall upon the Muslim lands. And the Muslims there will send their zakat in aid of us. So this is a point that I wanted to mention, that in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, he had this tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, had this vision, and he understood that zakat connects the Muslim ummah to one another. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in a Sahih hadith that the Muslim ummah is like one body. That if one part of it is in pain, the rest of the body shares that pain. They become sleepless as a result of it. So the ummah, when we see one part of the ummah in pain, we become sleepless at night. We share the pain of our Muslim brothers and sisters across the world. So zakat is a pillar of Islam, that is a fund for the development of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that connects us to our Muslim ummah across the world. And I wanted to share a personal experience. I was very much an advocate of, you can say, giving your zakat in your locality, and so on and so forth. And I still believe partially that we should be doing that. But ultimately, when I started traveling over the last couple of years, I traveled quite a lot. I went to a couple of different countries in the Muslim world, and I saw the level of poverty, and I saw the level of need, and the situation from a financial standpoint. I began to change my perspective. I began to believe and understand the reality of zakat on the ground. That we have to, inshallah ta'ala, do our part in terms of contributing to support the ummah across the world, locally and globally, inshallah ta'ala. So, what I advocate now is that we should be dividing our zakat up, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, and supporting the local Muslims in our vicinity, in our locality, and inshallah ta'ala contributing some of that globally as well. Whether that be back home from where we are from, obviously I'm in the UK, but back home would be, for example, where my parents are from and so forth, whether it's there or anywhere else in the Muslim world where there is a need. And zakat focuses very much on the need of the hour. And essentially, zakat, interestingly, when somebody is paying zakat, there is a level of nisab. There is a level of nisab that is the threshold, the minimum threshold that you have to have in order for you to pay the zakat. That threshold, interestingly, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that for gold, it is 87.48 grams, 87.48 grams, right? And for silver, it is 612 grams, right? That in currency, in our currency, translates as approximately $5,000 for, from the last time I checked, it was almost $4,800. So approximately, if you round it up, $5,000 for gold and $500 for silver, right? Now, this is a huge difference between the two. Obviously, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the weightings of gold and silver that he ﷺ specified, they were equal in terms of their value and worth. But now, the silver is worth approximately $500, and gold nisab is approximately $5,000. So it's worth 10 times more in terms of the value, right? So the scholars, they advise that we should adopt the nisab at the level of silver, so which is approximately $500. So if we exceed, our wealth exceeds approximately $500, then inshallah ta'ala we should be paying zakat. We are eligible and liable to pay zakat. But something that I've been researching over the last year or so is that when you look at the real worth of $500 in the world. $500, if you're in the West, for example, wouldn't get you by for a month, right? So ultimately, the purpose of zakat is that the rich pay the zakat. And this is some of the scholars, for example, Sheikh Al-Albani and others, they say that if you are paying zakat, if you're on the paying end of zakat, then from a Sharia perspective, you are considered rich. You are somebody who is wealthy and affluent from a Sharia point of view, right? So this is something that I'm researching at the moment in terms of the difference between gold and silver, the nisab, the $5,000 approximately versus $500, right? So I wanted to raise awareness of that as well, that ultimately when we are paying zakat, I still advocate and encourage people to pay zakat as per the silver nisab, because that ensures us that more zakat is being paid, and it is the safer position to take. However, ultimately, if you look at the difference between the two, we know that $5,000, if somebody has $5,000, then inshallah ta'ala, in terms of their net assets, then inshallah ta'ala, they are in a better position than you know, the one who has $500, for example. So I wanted to encourage everybody that above and beyond the zakat, we should also be paying sadaqah as well, as much as possible. The more wealth we have, the more sadaqah we should be giving. And some of the scholars, they actually mentioned that the one who cannot give sadaqah, the one who cannot spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they are struggling financially, then they will not be able to spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they are rich and affluent and wealthy. Because ultimately, the ability to spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it be through zakat, whether it be through sadaqah or lillah or any other aspects of giving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ultimately it is a tawfiq from Allah Azza wa Jal that is irrelevant of the wealth anybody has, right? It is connected to the iman that a person has. So when we spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it's through zakat and sadaqah and lillah, or whatever the case might be, whatever your intention is, if you're spending it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we have over, and this is something that we did in terms of our presentation, there are at least over 25 benefits, various benefits of spending in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life and in the hereafter, and on the day of judgment, right? The Prophet ﷺ, for example, he said that sadaqah stands in the way, it becomes a barrier in the way of calamities befalling upon you, right? Hardships and trials and tribulations coming upon you, right? So if we and we have all experienced this, we've all gone through difficulties and calamities and so forth, then we should realize that in order to safeguard ourselves from calamities, we should spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is also reflective of another hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said that verily, every single day, two angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descend, and they both call out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a dua. One angel calls out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he says, "Oh Allah, bless the one who spends in your path, who gives sadaqah, who gives charity in your path." And the other angel, he curses and he says, "Oh Allah, curse the one who does not spend in your path." And this is happening on a daily basis. And it could be as a minor of a donation as you can imagine. That even if you give a cent, even if you give a penny, even if you give a pound, a dollar in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is suffice for that dua to be accepted. The dua of an angel, an angelic dua, that an angel is calling out to Allah, asking for you to be blessed, asking for your success and so forth. So this is something that I wanted to add onto the discussion of the nisab and zakat and so forth, that we should be going above and beyond that. Zakat is the bare minimum that we should be giving. In fact, many scholars and Muslim leaders and righteous people before us, they wouldn't even pay zakat, believe it or not, because they wouldn't even have enough wealth that meets the level of nisab for them to pay the zakat. Why? Because they were already busy spending in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, investing in various causes, establishing endowments, and so on and so forth. That they wouldn't even have the level of nisab, that is 612 grams of silver or 87 grams of gold, to give in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of zakat, because they've already spent in Allah's path. Right? So this is something that I wanted to essentially highlight and focus on. And now, inshallah ta'ala, I want to move on towards the future of zakat, inshallah ta'ala, because we've discussed, for example, some historical examples, some classical examples. For example, obviously, we had the Baytul Mal, we had the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his time, how it was distributed. We are well aware of that. Then came Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Uthman bin Affan, the Ali bin Abi Talib, the Khulafa al-Rashidin, essentially, right? This was a pure time in terms of how zakat was collected and distributed. Okay, and it was so beautiful at that time. We have so many stories, wallahi, that time does not allow us to share. Time does not allow us to share those stories. And inshallah ta'ala, if you, inshallah, the Taqwa Invest team will share some of my details, because I've spoken about this subject at length in various places, and inshallah I'll be speaking about it in more detail in the future. So for those interested, they can inshallah have access to that via other platforms and so on and so forth. But what essentially I wanted to mention before I move on to the future of zakat is that zakat in essence is a faith-based wealth tax that is also considered to be a charitable contribution, for which you are rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life and in the hereafter, right? So what I mean by wealth tax is that, interestingly, we have some of the world's leading economists, and these are conventional economists, who are propagating the concept of a wealth tax. For example, we have Thomas Piketty in his book, The Capital. he demonstrates, and it's a very thick book in reality, in which he demonstrates the level of wealth inequality that exists in the world today. Forget income inequality, he is referring to wealth inequality. Wealth inequality stems from, for instance, you know, um, inheritance. So the rich inherit from their forefathers, and they become even richer and richer. The more capital they have, the more they can invest, the more it basically makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. So Thomas Piketty argues for, and other economists argue for, a wealth tax, essentially, right? And they're still trying to figure it all out, because ultimately they're trying to suggest that this is the solution to solve not only the issue of wealth inequality, but also the issue of poverty, the issue of those who are in debt. And we have nations that are in debt at the moment, right? So these are the discussions that they are having. But subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, within the Quran, within the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has already placed in a solution for us in zakat, a 2.5% flat rate wealth tax that is faith-based, and it is considered a charitable contribution for which we are rewarded. So essentially, this is a summary of zakat, that it preserves our wealth. So when we pay the zakat, it preserves our wealth, it purifies our wealth, and it ensures the redistribution of wealth. It ensures the redistribution of wealth, and it empowers those who are the mustahiqeen, from the categories of zakat, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah Tawbah. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين وعاملين عليها ومؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب وغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريدة من الله والله عليم حكيم. Right? That these are the categories of zakat: the poor, the needy, those who are the amilina alayha, the administrators of zakat, those who are collecting, managing, and distributing zakat, and those whose hearts are to be reconciled, their hearts are to be softened, and those who are in debt, those who are in slavery, those who are working for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who are stranded. And each of these category is vast in terms of who it can be and who it refers to. And this is a lengthy discussion that inshallah ta'ala we'll be having in future date. But for now, I just wanted to conclude today's session by talking about the future of zakat. And essentially, it's something that I'm advocating and advising different organizations across the world. And walillah alhamd, we have some amazing organizations, noble efforts, and sincere efforts taking place. I myself have been in contact with a number of them, from Pakistan to Turkey to South Africa to the United States of America, and Malaysia and Indonesia as well, and some other countries as well, where some efforts are being made now. But some very interesting examples we have. For example, we have the SANZAF, the South African National Zakat Fund. We have an interesting project within Turkey, led by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, for example. And we have within Saudi Arabia a very interesting example as well, under the supervision and guidance of King Salman. The last year, what took place is the digitalization of zakat, the digitalization of zakat collection, which was very interesting, in the sense that through an app called Zakati, which means my zakat, and this app was launched a couple of months prior to Ramadan, as a response to COVID-19 and the pandemic and the lockdowns that resulted from it. Obviously, because it would have hindered zakat collection, so they developed this app, and people paid zakat via this app. And within the first Ramadan, they raised over 40 million Saudi Arabian riyals, which approximately equals to $10 million, 10 million US dollars, within the first month, within the first year that they collected zakat within the Ramadan last year, 2020. So this is an interesting example, and I wanted to essentially allude to that as we face the future and the challenging times that have resulted from these unprecedented times, we have to adapt to digitalization and the online platforms, and we have to move with the times ultimately, even in zakat, even in our charity and waqf endowment projects and so forth, right? We have to adapt, and this is where there is an effort that is needed across the world, and we need to raise awareness of that. And inshallah, I've spoken about the example of zakati in Saudi Arabia in a lot of detail, but the idea is that we have to move with the times and we have to remain firm to the principles. Move with the times, remain firm to the principles, meaning that as we adapt and develop our zakat institutions to collect and manage as well as distribute zakat in a more effective manner through the digital and online platform, we also have to make sure that we adhere to the principles and that we establish a personal touch. A personal touch. For example, when you give somebody charity and you see the difference it makes to them face to face, when there is a smile on their face, that feeling, wallah, is irreplaceable, right? That feeling you can never get anywhere, right? And the reward that you get for that is something else as well. So as we adapt and we develop digital and online platforms for the collection of zakat, I would like to, inshallah ta'ala, encourage each and every one of us to participate in charitable activities that are face-to-face as well, inshallah ta'ala, obviously post COVID-19 and the restrictions that are there. This is something that I wanted to mention because ultimately, like I mentioned before, zakat connects the Muslim Ummah, and this is something that I wanted to share with you, brothers and sisters, today. And with that, I conclude that let us revive the pillar of Islam, as zakat, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from the inheritance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the knowledge that he shared with us, and allow us to revive the pillar of zakat. Allahumma ameen. Jazakumullah khairan, your brother in Islam, Osman Abdullah Malik.
Thank you so much for giving an informative talk about zakat. So we have a few questions. The first one is from Mr. Adnan. What is the difference between zakat and tax? Moreover, if one is paying tax, should he deduct this tax amount while paying zakat? Excuse me, yeah, you're on mute. I think so, you're on mute, yeah.
Okay, so apologies for that. Yeah, essentially, Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Essentially, zakat and tax are completely different. They are two completely different realities. Zakat is an Islamic concept, the pillar of Islam, a wealth tax as well as a charitable contribution based on faith. And a tax is something that is imposed by the government in different countries. It varies and so on and so forth. And it is utilized completely differently. Zakat is utilized by distributing the zakat to mustahiqeen, those who are in need, the 8 categories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, right? And this is something that I wanted to point out, that when you look at the charities across the world that are collecting and distributing zakat, majority of them don't realize the difference between zakat and sadaqah, right? So once zakat comes in, they treat it the same as sadaqah, meaning they give it out to the poor and needy the same way they give out sadaqah, for example. But zakat is completely different. Zakat is specific in its nature. Sadaqah you give voluntarily. Zakat you have to give as an obligation. Sadaqah you can give how much ever you want. Zakat is 2.5%. Sadaqah can go out to whoever, and in different situations and capacities it could be used, but zakat is specific to these 8 categories. So firstly, if we understand zakat in relation to sadaqah, then this is a one step forward. But in terms of tax and taxation, essentially, is completely different. And essentially, if you study the book of Fiqh al-Zakat by Yusuf al-Qaradawi and other scholars, they essentially allude to and conclude that these are two completely different, you know, realities, and you cannot basically conflate the two, and they both have to be paid separately, and you cannot include one within the other, uh, essentially, right? Um, so yeah, this is the answer to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Thank you. The next question is, if somebody owes us some amount of money since a long time, but we do not know for sure whether we will receive that money back or not, do we need to include it while calculating zakat?
Yeah, so essentially, we've had some discussions regarding this, and obviously, from a fiqh perspective, you know, the scholars would say that you don't have to include this within the zakat if obviously you don't feel like the person will pay you back. If you have no contact with the person and it's been a long time, you're chasing them up and you're not getting anywhere with that, you don't have to include that within your zakat calculation. But if you feel that the person will be able to repay you within this coming year, then inshallah ta'ala you should include it. And if you include it, then inshallah ta'ala, some of the scholars they mention that it will bring you the money back as a virtue of zakat, even if that person is unable to repay from the outset. But because of you giving zakat on that money, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enable and give the tawfiq and bring you that money in your possession and ownership. Ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala ala wa alam.
Thank you. The next question is there any mechanism to get zakat from people who are supposed to pay zakat, but they do not pay intentionally?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is there any mechanism to get zakat from people who are supposed to pay zakat, but they are not paying it intentionally?
Okay. So ultimately, like, you know, in terms of, I can speak. Obviously, I'm sitting in the West, so there isn't in the Western world, we don't have a mechanism that would make people who are not paying zakat pay it, essentially, right? For example, if it's to do with tax, for instance, in the West, if somebody's evading tax and so forth, there are, you know, from the government, there are legalities. There will be notices, there'll be penalties, and there'll be legal cases if somebody did not pay their tax. Obviously, we don't have that when it comes to zakat. Ultimately, right? The world that we live in today, but we know of historically how serious this matter was at the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where essentially a war broke out as a result of people who refused to pay zakat, right? Obviously, there's a difference between somebody who refusing to pay zakat versus somebody who's just not aware of it, or they've forgotten or whatever. So this is why we raise awareness and we encourage people to pay the zakat, inshallah ta'ala, because ultimately it is not you losing out. 2.5%, you think you have lost out, but ultimately you have gained. Your 2.5% is somebody else's 100%, and inshallah ta'ala, through that you are rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, where it is everlasting. This wealth that we have in the world today, it will come to an end, but the rewards that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in the hereafter will be everlasting, and inshallah ta'ala will be rewarded for that.
Thank you. The next question is it better to give zakat as a good amount to one family or distribute it among several people?
I personally, I'm of the understanding, and I advise that it is better to give it to one and make them independent, make them self-sufficient, make them into payers of zakat. So it's better, if, for example, somebody had $1,000 as their zakat, I'd advise giving it to one individual, one family, if it means that this person will become self-sufficient, and inshallah ta'ala, there is a likelihood of them being zakat payers the following year, right? Rather than distribute it across, you know, 10 people where they're all they're okay for now, but they're going to be struggling again. So if we can all focus on maximizing the impact and creating a transformational change within the distribution of zakat, then inshallah ta'ala we will see an increase within zakat in the coming years, and through that, more and more people will become zakat payers, because that's the goal. The goal is we want to bring people out of poverty. We want them to go from being zakat recipients to zakat payers, and ultimately that's the goal. So that's what I would advise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Thank you. The next one is, if one wants to distribute zakat, what is the criteria to ensure the person is entitled to take zakat?
If one is sorry?
If one wants to distribute zakat, what is the criteria to ensure the person is entitled to take zakat?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I always advise, and this is a key point, that if you do some research, globally, zakat is worth approximately $1 trillion, right, across the world, right? This is the global worth of zakat, like how much zakat is due in terms of the across the Muslim world. So essentially, I advise that zakat should be given via credible and authoritative zakat funds and zakat bodies, right? Essentially. But if, for example, that is something that can't be done, then you have to do your due diligence in terms of making sure that the individual who you are giving zakat to is zakat eligible, right? And for that, you have to firstly understand the different categories of zakat and who is applicable and who isn't. And secondly, you have to have, inshallah, a scholar on board to assess the situation. This is what is highly advised, so that we make sure that zakat funds are not being, there's no deficiencies within the distribution of zakat funds. So that's what I would advise personally, that the more you know in terms of the details of the categories of zakat, the better you can make that judgment. And ultimately, you rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help people through zakat.
The last question from our YouTube streaming is that how is zakat going to change the lives of people or eradicate poverty? Zakat is just given to specific category and the amount given is not enough. And the same person has asked one more question, which is, some zakat recipient have no financial literacy. How do we help these people to maximize what has been given to them to be subsequent zakat payers?
Yeah, no, these are two very interesting questions, and this is what I'd like to say, that in terms of the literacy, then I believe that it is part and parcel of the role of those who are collecting, managing, and distributing zakat, that they provide an element of education to their recipients. Because ultimately, the recipients of zakat are in need of financial support, but above and beyond that, they're also in need of moral support and emotional support, as well as psychological support, and also the education with regards to how to manage and handle the money that has been allocated to them. Because sometimes what happens is, for those who are in poverty, they'll be given the funds, but they don't know how to necessarily spend that in the best manner. So that is very important, that needs to be done by the one who is within the zakat administration. They need to make sure that there is a program for the one who receives zakat to have some level of financial literacy, some education within that. That is very very important. In terms of the first question, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me, please? I just want to be sure in terms of responding to that properly.
Yeah, sure. So the person is asking, how is zakat going to change the lives of people or eradicate poverty? Zakat is just given to specific category and the amount given is not enough.
Yeah, no, so okay, this is true. Thank you for repeating the question for me. This is true that oftentimes the zakat given is not enough to change someone's life, and this is why I always say that why we need the likes, or we need the model of Baitul Mal, right? Because what that does is it pools in the zakat funds. If I was to give zakat, let's suppose it's $100, that's and if I was to give that to somebody, that's limited money, right? It cannot necessarily make a difference in somebody's life. for the long run, right? For the short term, it will obviously benefit them, but for the long run, it may not. But when we pool our money together, when the millionaires and the billionaires are paying the zakat and it comes in together into one fund, then inshallah ta'ala it can be distributed to make an effective change in people's lives. So ultimately it goes back to the way zakat is collected, managed and distributed. That this problem can only be solved once we go back to the model that was implemented by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that for that there is a need for a fund that is transparent, that is sincerely set up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and only then we can make a difference like that. And ultimately we have seen examples. I have personally seen examples of people who were on the receiving end of zakat and now they're on the giving end of zakat, and they are giving zakat to such an extent that it is taking care of hundreds and hundreds of people, because they have become millionaires and billionaires, and the zakat alone is worth millions and millions of dollars. So we have seen those examples, and I just wanted to point that out, that ultimately zakat makes a difference for the one who gives it, and it makes a difference for the one who receives it, because it is not necessarily about the amount of the money, but the blessings behind that as well.
There's one question. Is there a reliable book or a platform where we can read properly about zakat?
Yeah. So there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of books available on that. I recommend, for example, the book of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the Fiqh of Zakat. But that's a very advanced level book. This is a book of over 750 pages. There's a lot of detail. Perhaps that's not needed for the masses, because that's essentially a scholarly work. But inshallah ta'ala, if you get in touch with myself, anybody who has any questions or wants to know more about zakat, then I can inshallah provide you with relevant information and resources. If you log on to my website, usmanabdullahmalik.com, I have on there a section for zakat, and inshallah ta'ala there'll be a lot of resources that I will be uploading myself on there.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite the Chief Strategy Officer of Taqwa Invest, Farah Hashim, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. I, on behalf of Taqwa Invest, extend a hearty vote of thanks to all the speakers today. I thank Dr. Kinan Salim for enlightening us on the impact of COVID on Islamic fintech. I also thank Mr. Usman Malik for sharing with us the valuable knowledge and information on zakat. We are truly indebted by the guidance you people have provided, and especially Mr. Usman Malik, you have been a guide throughout. We look forward for more such informative interactions with you people in future. I also thank the participants who joined for the session. Thank you.
Please do join us in the second session, which will start at 6:30 p.m. Indian time, 5 p.m. Gulf Standard Time. Thank you so much.